Every year, over 100 cases of teacher-student relationships escalate to devastating outcomes. These stories leave lasting scars on families and communities alike. In one quiet town, a trusted teacher and a bright young student formed a bond that began with mentorship but unraveled into a dangerous fixation. The consequences? A crime so shocking it would forever change the lives of everyone involved. In the realm of education, teachers are entrusted with the immense responsibility of shaping young minds, fostering growth, and guiding their students toward a promising future. But what happens when that trust is broken? When the line between guidance and manipulation blurs, the consequences can be devastating. This is the story of a teacher, respected and admired in his community, and a young student, full of potential and promise. Their connection began like many others, a bond formed through mentorship and shared interests. Yet, over time, that bond evolved into something far more complex, far more dangerous. The relationship crossed boundaries that should never have been approached, and as the dynamic shifted, so did the balance of power, control, and emotion. The events that followed sent shockwaves through a quiet town, leaving families grieving, friends questioning how they missed the signs, and an entire community grappling with a tragedy they never expected. It became a story that highlighted not only the vulnerabilities in personal boundaries but also the devastating impact of unchecked obsession and emotional entanglement. Today, we uncover the heartbreaking true crime case of a teacher and his student whose lives became intertwined in ways that would forever alter their fates. What began as moments of trust and admiration quickly spiraled into a chain of events that no one could have imagined, culminating in a murder that shocked the nation. How does a connection meant to educate and nurture turn into a story of betrayal, control, and loss? How could the responsibilities of a trusted figure in a young person's life shift into something so destructive? These are the questions we'll explore as we unravel the facts behind this chilling case. This isn't just a story of a crime, it's a story of broken trust, manipulation, and the devastating consequences of obsession. The relationship between a teacher and a student is one built on a foundation of trust, guidance, and a clear understanding of professional boundaries. Teachers are entrusted with the responsibility of shaping their students' academic and personal growth, acting as mentors, role models, and advocates. Yet, when the boundaries of this dynamic are crossed, the consequences can ripple far beyond the individuals involved, leaving scars that last a lifetime. Teacher-student relationships are inherently imbalanced. Teachers hold a position of authority, one that places them in control of grades, feedback, and even the perception of a student's success. Students, on the other hand, often look up to their teachers with admiration, seeing them as figures of wisdom and support. This dynamic creates a power imbalance that, when misused, can lead to serious ethical dilemmas. The ethical considerations are complex. On the surface, the boundary is simple: teachers must remain professional, avoiding any interaction that could be construed as personal or intimate. However, in reality, these lines can blur in subtle ways that seem harmless at first but lay the groundwork for harmful and destructive outcomes. A private conversation meant to offer guidance may become an emotional crutch. A moment of praise may fuel dependency. And a shared understanding may transform into something much more dangerous. Psychologically, these situations often stem from underlying emotional or mental health struggles on one or both sides. Experts suggest that teachers who engage in inappropriate relationships with their students may be seeking validation or connection, often stemming from unresolved personal issues. Similarly, students may find themselves drawn to the attention and approval of a figure they perceive as a protector or guide. This dynamic creates fertile ground for manipulation, where one party exerts influence over the other, intentionally or unintentionally, often without understanding the full consequences. In this particular case, subtle but telling red flags emerged early. The teacher in question began offering the student extra attention, gestures that at first seemed to stem from genuine care and investment in the student's success. Private mentoring sessions became more frequent, and communication extended beyond school hours. Text messages, initially professional in tone, started to include more personal elements. Compliments, while initially harmless, became more pointed, creating a dynamic that encouraged dependency and blurred the lines of their relationship. Colleagues and friends noticed signs, but these signs were easy to dismiss. After all, this teacher was known for being supportive and engaging with students, often going the extra mile to ensure they felt encouraged and seen. In isolation, none of these actions seemed overtly inappropriate. Yet, together, they painted a picture of a relationship that had strayed far from the professional boundaries that should have been maintained. The student, too, displayed signs of being caught in a dynamic that was growing increasingly unhealthy. She began isolating herself from peers, often prioritizing time with the teacher over her own social activities. Her grades improved in the subjects he taught but began to decline elsewhere, a pattern that some dismissed as a natural shift in focus but which, in hindsight, reflected the growing emotional dependency. When the relationship crossed into emotional entanglement, the consequences began to unfold rapidly. What had started as a mentorship devolved into a dynamic where boundaries were no longer respected, and accountability disappeared. This was no longer about education or guidance, it became about control, influence, and an obsession that would ultimately end in tragedy. The warning signs were there, but they were subtle, easy to ignore or explain away. Friends, family, and colleagues, while uneasy, lacked concrete evidence to act. And as the relationship escalated behind closed doors, the outcome became inevitable. This case is a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can result when professional boundaries are crossed and unhealthy dynamics are allowed to flourish unchecked. How does such a connection evolve from mentorship to manipulation? How do the warning signs go unnoticed until it's too late? These are questions that haunt those left behind, and they form the heart of understanding how this tragedy unfolded. Let's look closer at how these red flags manifested and why they were so easily dismissed. John Smith was a 34-year-old high school English teacher in a suburban town. By all accounts, he was well liked by students and respected by his colleagues. Known for his enthusiasm in the classroom, he had a knack for making literature come alive, engaging even the most uninterested students. He was the type of teacher who volunteered to run after-school programs, help struggling students prepare for exams, and often stayed late to provide extra tutoring. Parents praised him, colleagues admired his dedication, and students saw him as someone who truly cared about their success. But beyond the glowing reputation, John's personal life told a more complicated story. He had grown up in a strict, high-pressure household where academic success was not just encouraged but demanded. By the time he reached adulthood, he had internalized a need for external validation. Teaching, it seemed, offered him an endless source of approval, both from students who appreciated his efforts and from the community that celebrated his commitment to education. John's colleagues, while praising his work ethic, sometimes commented on his tendency to blur professional boundaries. He would frequently eat lunch with students rather than joining the faculty in the lounge, and he often shared more about his personal life than seemed appropriate. While most brushed this off as part of his approachable demeanor, some quietly questioned whether his need for connection with his students was entirely healthy. His professional record was spotless, with glowing reviews during every evaluation. Administrators noted his ability to connect with struggling students and bring out their best work. Yet, there were subtle signs that pointed to an underlying restlessness. John often changed schools every few years, citing reasons like seeking new challenges or wanting to explore different teaching environments. While these transitions raised no major alarms, they hinted at someone who was perhaps searching for something more than a change of scenery. Outside of school, John led a relatively quiet life. He was divorced, with no children, and spent much of his free time reading or attending local events. Those who knew him personally described him as friendly but somewhat reserved. He didn't share much about his divorce, but some speculated it had been difficult for him, as he rarely spoke of his ex-wife or the reasons for their separation. John's personal struggles began to emerge more clearly in subtle ways. He seemed to thrive on the validation he received from his role as a teacher, and some noticed that he became particularly invested in students who appeared to look up to him or seek his guidance. This wasn't unusual for a dedicated teacher, but over time, it became evident that John had a pattern of becoming overly involved in the lives of certain students. He would offer them rides home, attend their extracurricular activities, and maintain contact with them even after they had graduated. These behaviors, while not overtly inappropriate, created a pattern that some found concerning. Yet, because there was no concrete evidence of wrongdoing, most dismissed it as an overzealous teaching style. To those around him, John seemed like a caring individual who simply wanted the best for his students. It was only later that these behaviors would be viewed in a different light. John's outward charm and professional success masked deeper insecurities and a need for control. He sought admiration and validation not just from his peers but from those he mentored. For many years, this need was channeled into productive and commendable efforts as an educator. But as we'll see, this same drive for connection and approval would eventually lead him down a dangerous path. Understanding John's background is crucial to piecing together the events that followed. His actions, while shocking, were not entirely without warning. They were the culmination of years of unresolved personal struggles, professional boundary blurring, and an increasing inability to separate his role as a teacher from his need for personal fulfillment. This foundation set the stage for the tragic events that would later unfold. Emma Johnson was a 17-year-old high school senior with aspirations that set her apart from her peers. She had a quiet determination and a passion for writing that showed in her essays and creative assignments. Teachers often praised her for her ability to capture complex emotions on paper, and her peers admired her talent, even if she kept to herself much of the time. Emma dreamed of one day becoming a published author, and she viewed her education as a crucial stepping stone toward that goal. Her family life, however, painted a starkly different picture. Emma's home was far from the supportive environment one might expect for a student with her potential. Her parents had a strained relationship, marred by frequent arguments and long periods of tension. Financial struggles often overshadowed moments of peace, leaving Emma to navigate much of her adolescence without the stability or encouragement she craved. This tumultuous environment left her yearning for a sense of order and validation that she seldom found at home. Emma was the youngest of 3 siblings, but the significant age gap between her and her older brothers often made her feel like an only child. Her brothers had moved out years earlier, leaving Emma to bear the brunt of her parents' discord. She frequently escaped the chaos by retreating into books, pouring her thoughts into journals, and excelling academically. Writing became both her refuge and her means of expressing emotions she struggled to articulate in other ways. At school, Emma was reserved but polite, the type of student teachers appreciated for her hard work and quiet demeanor. Her interactions with classmates were limited, she was friendly but rarely sought out social connections. Some described her as introspective, while others mistook her quietness for aloofness. Beneath her composed exterior, Emma carried the weight of self-doubt and a deep desire to be seen and valued. It was in this context that her relationship with her teacher, John Smith, began to take shape. Initially, their connection was rooted in a shared appreciation for literature. John recognized Emma's talent early on and frequently complimented her work, encouraging her to pursue her dream of becoming a writer. For Emma, this validation was both new and deeply meaningful. In her teacher, she saw a mentor who understood her aspirations in a way that few others had. John's attention quickly became a source of comfort for Emma. In a world where she often felt overlooked or misunderstood, he offered her praise and guidance that made her feel seen. What began as occasional feedback on assignments turned into longer conversations after class, discussions about her favorite authors, and eventually, extended mentoring sessions outside of school hours. To Emma, this seemed like the natural evolution of a mentor-mentee relationship. She had no reason to suspect that it would become anything more than that. Emma's vulnerabilities, however, made her particularly susceptible to the dynamic that was forming. Coming from a home where emotional support was scarce, she was eager to find approval and connection wherever it was offered. John's attention filled a void she hadn't fully realized existed. But this reliance on his guidance and praise gradually grew into something more complicated, a dependence that would ultimately blur the lines of their relationship. Her friends, though few in number, noticed subtle changes in Emma's behavior. She began spending less time with them and more time with her teacher. Her conversations often revolved around John's advice or insights, and her focus on her schoolwork became almost singularly tied to his approval. While her friends questioned this growing connection, Emma dismissed their concerns, insisting that her teacher was simply helping her reach her full potential. Emma's parents, caught up in their own struggles, paid little attention to her burgeoning attachment to John. If anything, they saw his involvement as a positive influence in her life, a sign that someone cared about her education and future. They were unaware of the extent to which this relationship was beginning to shape Emma's sense of self-worth and direction. Looking back, there were signs that Emma's relationship with John was becoming unhealthy. Her growing dependence on his validation, her increasing isolation from her peers, and her reluctance to discuss their interactions with anyone else were all red flags that went unnoticed or unaddressed. Emma's vulnerabilities had created an opening for a connection that, while seemingly supportive on the surface, would later reveal itself to be far more harmful than she could have imagined. Understanding Emma's background is essential to unraveling the events that followed. Her ambition, her search for connection, and her vulnerabilities all played a role in the development of a dynamic that would lead to tragic consequences. Emma's story is one of potential overshadowed by manipulation, a reminder of the devastating impact that unchecked power dynamics can have on those who are most vulnerable. The relationship between John and Emma began with the appearance of professionalism and good intentions. As Emma's English teacher, John first noticed her potential during an assignment in which she demonstrated exceptional writing skills. Recognizing her talent, he offered to mentor her, suggesting additional sessions after school to refine her skills and help her pursue her goal of becoming a writer. At first, these sessions were entirely focused on academics, structured discussions about essays, literary analysis, and advice on writing techniques. Over time, however, the nature of these interactions began to shift. The conversations gradually extended beyond the scope of her schoolwork. They began discussing Emma's personal life, her challenges at home, and her struggles to fit in with her peers. John positioned himself as a source of support, offering her advice and encouragement that went far beyond his role as a teacher. For Emma, these conversations became a lifeline, a space where she felt understood and valued. What began as occasional after-school meetings soon turned into regular appointments. These sessions grew longer, sometimes stretching into the evening. Then came the late-night texts, initially about books or assignments, but eventually about more personal topics. Emma started to confide in John about her hopes, fears, and frustrations, while John shared details about his own life, including struggles from his past and his experiences as a teacher. This exchange of personal information deepened their connection and blurred the boundaries that should have remained in place. As their relationship evolved, Emma began to prioritize these interactions over her other relationships. She spent less time with her friends and became more isolated from her peers. Her classmates noticed her growing attachment to John, but most assumed it was simply the result of her being a motivated student seeking additional help. To them, it seemed harmless, even commendable, that a teacher would invest so much time in a student's success. John's colleagues also observed changes in his behavior. Some noticed that he seemed to spend an unusual amount of time with Emma, both during and after school hours. Others found it odd that he often brought up her accomplishments in conversations, speaking about her with an enthusiasm that went beyond what was typical for a teacher discussing a student. While a few raised quiet concerns among themselves, no one felt they had enough evidence to take action. After all, John had a reputation for being a dedicated teacher, and there was nothing overtly inappropriate about his actions, at least not at first glance. The warning signs were subtle but present. Emma began to rely heavily on John's validation, and her academic success became closely tied to his approval. Her writing, once a personal passion, now revolved around his feedback and encouragement. At the same time, John's investment in Emma's life grew more intense. He started attending her extracurricular activities, offering her rides home, and even showing up at events unrelated to school. What had started as an innocent mentorship had become a relationship built on emotional dependence and blurred boundaries. To the outside world, their relationship remained within the realm of plausible deniability. Emma's parents appreciated the attention John gave their daughter, seeing it as a sign of a teacher going above and beyond to support her education. Her classmates and teachers, while occasionally uneasy, dismissed their concerns as overthinking. But beneath the surface, the dynamic between John and Emma had shifted irreversibly, setting the stage for the events that would follow. The evolution of their relationship was marked by gradual changes, small, seemingly insignificant moments that collectively created a dangerous pattern. By the time the true nature of their connection became clear, the damage had already been done, and the consequences would be far more devastating than anyone could have imagined. As the relationship between John and Emma progressed, the boundaries became more blurred, and the dynamics grew increasingly unstable. Emma, now feeling the weight of their connection, began to recognize that what she once viewed as mentorship and guidance had crossed into dangerous territory. Conflicted and overwhelmed, she decided to end their relationship, hoping to regain control of her life and focus on her future. For John, however, Emma's decision was an unbearable blow. What he perceived as rejection ignited a mix of anger, desperation, and a need to regain control. Tensions reached their peak on the night of July 14. Earlier that day, Emma had informed John that she no longer wanted to continue their interactions outside of school. She had expressed a desire to move on and create distance, unaware of how deeply John's obsession had taken hold. That evening, unable to accept her decision, John followed her to a secluded spot near the edge of town, a place where she often went to write and reflect. What began as a confrontation quickly escalated into an argument filled with heightened emotions and accusations. Witness accounts and later evidence revealed that the confrontation lasted for nearly an hour. Passers-by reported hearing raised voices, but in the darkness of the night, they paid little attention, assuming it was a typical disagreement. During the argument, John's anger turned physical. Investigators pieced together that Emma attempted to leave, but John blocked her path. The struggle became violent, and in a moment of uncontrollable rage, John committed the unthinkable. Emma's life was taken in what investigators would later describe as a fit of blind fury. John fled the scene, leaving behind evidence that would eventually lead to his capture. Emma's family reported her missing later that night when she failed to return home. A community-wide search ensued, with friends, neighbors, and local authorities combing the area. 2 days later, Emma's body was discovered by a group of volunteers in the wooded area where she had been last seen. The discovery sent shockwaves through the town, turning what had been a missing person case into a full-fledged murder investigation. Police quickly honed in on John as the primary suspect. Emma's phone, recovered at the scene, contained a series of incriminating messages from John, sent in the hours leading up to her death. These messages painted a picture of a man unable to cope with rejection, oscillating between pleading for reconciliation and threatening dire consequences if Emma cut ties with him. Additional evidence, including eyewitness accounts of his car near the scene and physical evidence linking him to the crime, solidified the case against him. The arrest of John Smith stunned the community. Parents, teachers, and students alike struggled to reconcile the image of the dedicated, caring teacher they thought they knew with the man now accused of such a heinous act. News of the crime spread quickly, drawing attention from media outlets and sparking widespread discussions about the dangers of unchecked relationships between authority figures and those in their care. In the days that followed, Emma's family mourned the loss of a young woman whose life had been filled with promise and potential. Her friends gathered to honor her memory, sharing stories of her kindness, talent, and dreams for the future. Meanwhile, the town grappled with the question of how this tragedy could have been prevented, reflecting on the subtle warning signs that had been overlooked. For investigators, the case was straightforward in terms of evidence, but the emotional toll it took on everyone involved was immeasurable. John's actions were driven by a combination of obsession, loss of control, and a refusal to accept reality. His inability to separate his feelings from his professional role led to consequences that no one could undo. The night of July 14 marked the turning point in a story that had spiraled out of control. What began as a seemingly harmless connection between a teacher and a student ended in a crime that would leave scars on an entire community. Emma's loss was a painful reminder of the dangers of blurred boundaries and unchecked emotions, a tragedy that could have been avoided if warning signs had been acted upon sooner. The small town where this tragedy unfolded was left in a state of disbelief. For years, John Smith had been regarded as a dedicated teacher, someone who had positively impacted the lives of countless students. To many, he represented what was good and honorable in education. Emma Johnson, on the other hand, was seen as a bright, ambitious young woman with an extraordinary future ahead of her. The revelation of what had occurred between them shattered these perceptions, leaving a community grappling with questions they never thought they'd have to ask. Parents worried about the safety and well-being of their own children, wondering if they could trust those entrusted with guiding them. Students who once admired their teacher were now left to reconcile their memories with the shocking reality of his actions. Teachers and administrators faced scrutiny over whether enough had been done to prevent the tragedy, whether there were signs they had missed or steps they could have taken to intervene earlier. Emma's family, devastated by the loss of their daughter, called for accountability and change, urging others to be vigilant and aware of the dynamics that can exist within seemingly professional relationships. Friends and classmates honored Emma's memory, holding candlelight vigils and sharing stories of her kindness, talent, and the dreams she had spoken of so often. Her absence was deeply felt, a void that could never be filled. This case serves as a stark reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing unhealthy power dynamics. Relationships that blur boundaries between authority figures and those in their care can have far-reaching and devastating consequences. It highlights the need for vigilance, not just within schools but across all areas where trust and power intersect. Teachers, mentors, and leaders hold positions of influence that require unwavering professionalism and accountability. When that trust is misused, the effects ripple far beyond the individuals directly involved. There are lessons to be learned here, lessons about the importance of early intervention, the need for clear boundaries, and the responsibility we all share in protecting vulnerable individuals from harm. This tragedy could have been prevented if the warning signs had been recognized and acted upon sooner. It is a sobering reminder that small red flags, if left unaddressed, can escalate into life-altering consequences. The story of John Smith and Emma Johnson is one that no community wants to experience, but it is a story that must be told. It is a call to action, a plea for awareness, and a reminder of the profound impact that trust and responsibility can have when misused. For Emma's family, the pain of her loss will never fade, but their hope is that her story will serve as a catalyst for change, ensuring that others will not endure the same heartbreak they now carry. The lessons from this case are clear: we must take even the smallest signs of concern seriously. We must be willing to ask difficult questions and intervene when necessary. And most importantly, we must work together to ensure that the systems designed to protect and support young people truly do just that. While the town where this tragedy occurred may never fully heal, it stands as a reminder of the importance of vigilance and the price of complacency. Emma's memory is a reminder of the potential that was lost, but it is also a call to honor that potential by fostering safer, more supportive environments for all. Her story, though tragic, will not be forgotten. It will continue to serve as a warning, a lesson, and a call for change. What do you think caused this teacher-student relationship to spiral so far out of control? Was it a failure to recognize early warning signs, or something deeper in their personal lives that led to this tragic outcome? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm genuinely interested in hearing your theories and insights on this case. If you're captivated by true crime stories, make sure to check out our next feature, where we'll explore another case that challenges our understanding of trust and human behavior. It's a story that will leave you with even more questions about the complexities of human relationships. Trust me, You won't want to miss it. Before you go, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you're always the first to know when a new story drops. Your support means so much and helps us continue to bring these important stories to light. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.